And hello, everybody. Welcome once again to another edition of 50K Webinar Blueprint. My name is Rich Willens. Thank you so very much for joining us today. It's a beautiful day where we're broadcasting live from the great state of Florida and my new hometown of Naples. And I want to thank you very much for joining us on this Hangout. And if you're reading this or if you're watching this recording, it is so nice to have you along. The whole idea behind this recording and this whole program is how you can make $50,000 on one webinar. It has been done. It's been done by many people, but a lot of people who just are starting out doing webinars really don't know the right way or the wrong way, or really any way, on how to monetize and scale things up. So that's what this program is all about. It's a series of interviews that I've done with many marketers, and all of these marketers have been successful internet marketers who have done webinars for many years, and today's guest is no exception. Please welcome all the way from Raleigh, North Carolina. I know that. I was in Fayetteville. Mark Thompson. Welcome, Mark, to the program.
Thanks for having me, Rich. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much for doing it. You have been doing webinars for a long time, and I remember when you first put together your webinar program. You and I did an interview, and I was working as part of Webinar Swaps, and you considered me one of the guys that could perhaps teach some of your students on how to do webinars. How's that going, by the way? And first of all, what's the name of your webinar program, and is it still available?
Yeah, so we have Webinar Ignition, which is our webinar. It's a WordPress plugin that helps you to run webinars through live streaming. So you can embed a Google Hangout like we're doing, or now with other solutions out there now, anything that has a live feed, you can run live and evergreen webinars with that product. So we have a software component, and then I also have a masterclass. It's our webinar masterclass where I walk through basically the blueprint of what we do in our business whenever we have a webinar. So how we prepare for it, what our format's like, how we get people onto the call, what do we do as our follow-up sequence. So we really walk through A to Z. So we have both the software and the training part of it.
Well, what you've just done is you've asked all the questions that I was going to ask you. So thank you very much for coming by. Oh, wait a second. I think it's time for you to answer that. So when you're going to do a webinar, do you do a webinar with your own products, or are you an affiliate and do webinars with other people's products?
Well, really both. I mean, certain products lend themselves to webinars. I say anything that's probably $300 or more, it's better to do a live webinar pitch, just because when someone's willing to pay hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars, it's a better marketing outlet to use webinars, as opposed to just sending people to a static sales page or a sales page with a VSL on it. It's a bigger buying decision, and it's much easier to overcome objections on a webinar format.
And you're absolutely correct. So it's okay, and I say it's okay if you don't have your own product, to go ahead and promote on a webinar using your list other people's products, because you actually become a partner with whoever it is that you have on your program, correct?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'd say we do 50% of our webinars are internal. So maybe it's a product that we are just launching, or we're doing a test webinar to a segment just to test it out and see how well it converts. And then if it converts well, then we're going to open it up to our entire list, or we'll actually reach out to affiliates and say, hey, we just did a little test webinar. We'd love to have you, run it to your list. This is how it converted. So sometimes we'll just take small segments and do a webinar, and then we'll open it up if it's converting well.
That's pretty awesome. Now let's talk about the steps that it takes for a webinar to not only start from the beginning, but to go ahead and finish it up with follow-up. So what's the first thing that you do when you produce your own webinar with your own product?
So the first thing we're going to do is think about what's going to be the big hook. So, how are we going to get people to attend the webinar? So we'll create a registration page. I'll usually do a video introduction, just saying, hey, here's why you need to be on this webinar, right? Especially webinars have become so mainstream. people don't attend webinars as much as they used to. One, because there's so many webinars out there, and two, they've realized that they get pitched on a webinar. So you can't go into it thinking like you're just going to pitch them. You have to provide some really good training. And so you need to have that 1, 2, or 3 main hooks that people are going to why they want to attend. So we try to come up with those few different bullet points and really hammer home, hey, this is what you're going to learn. And you have to make sure that you deliver on that during your webinar presentation, and then you can pitch them at the end. But if you don't provide that value in the beginning, then it can really backfire and you can lose your credibility. So the first step is creating that registration page, creating that main hook, and that's one of the best ways to get people that do register to get them to come on to the live webinar.
You know, I agree with you, and I especially agree with you by using a video. You know, people like to see who it is that they're doing business with. And you're exactly right. When you talk about what you're going to have to deliver in a webinar, since webinar swaps started and all these webinars, like you said, have been going on now for years, people, when they put together a webinar, all they do is put together either a 60-minute commercial, or they know that they're going to get pitched in the end, and they wait and wait and wait, right. And they're just ready for that. When are you going to ask me for some money? So what you said about delivering content is very good. Now, in your video sales letter in the beginning on the registration page, do you tell them what it is that you are going to present, the type of content? And do you offer any kind of download or cheat sheet or something that they could use perhaps to take notes for your webinar?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, I've learned, if you guys know who Jason Fladlin is from Rapid Crush, he's another webinar kind of guru that I've really followed and studied. And one of the things that he always says is, you know, give them enough that they're enticed, but, you know, don't give them everything, right? Because you want them to attend. So sometimes he'll actually do like an ethical bribe, be like, hey, if you attend this webinar live, I'm going to give you X, Y, and Z, right? I'll give you a free copy of a piece of software, or I'm going to give you this blueprint or mind map but you can only get it if you come on the call. Or, hey, we're going to give away a free iPad to one lucky person that comes onto the call. So sometimes we'll give little cheat sheets and freebies, or sometimes we'll just say, hey, if you show up live, this is what you're going to get.
I like the term ethical bribe. I was listening to a Chris Record training program on list building, and he says, well, now it's time to offer an ethical bribe. So not only does an ethical bribe work for building your list and capturing your email list, but it also works for your registration and to ensure that people are going to show up on your webinar. Now, in order to ensure people to show up on your webinar, there's a certain style or a certain amount of emails that you send in order to increase the amount of people who attend. Tell me, what is your email strategy to get people to show up to a webinar?
We usually do 3 emails. So we usually do one 24 hours before the webinar. Then we do one probably 3 hours before the webinar. And then we'll do one 15 minutes before the webinar. Something else that we've been testing is doing SMS or text message notifications as well. So we'll send them, if they put in their phone number, we'll send them a text message, 5-10 minutes beforehand. And that's another way to get people onto the call. So we tend not to do more than 3 notifications or emails, just because it can be, a little overwhelming and people can get turned off from that. So,
well, that's a great idea that you're using SMS. Now, most of the time when you have an opt-in, it's usually name, first name, last name, and then email address. Do you find that people are willing to give up their telephone number?
It depends. It depends on the content and what type of audience you're catering to. Probably we get 15 to 20% will actually put in their phone number. But hey, that's, even though it's not, we'd like to get more than that, but hey, that's 15 to 20% that we didn't have before. And once they subscribe, you can tell them about other upcoming webinars as well. And it's similar to an email list where they can opt out to it. Right. So if they don't want to get those messages, they don't have to.
Right, and I agree with that. And the nice thing about getting a telephone number is, if they are interested, you could almost do a follow-up with that and say, well, we have your telephone number, or not necessarily say that we have your telephone number, but you have access to do follow-up and perhaps close them when they didn't close the first time.
Sure.
So it's just an additional. So we just talked about your email process, and you do this 3 days. Are you saying that when you start your webinar, or when you're going to have your webinar, let's say it's on Thursday, you go back 3 days prior, either Monday or Tuesday, and then only send one email, not the second day, and then two on the day of?
It depends. So, I mean, we've tested a few different things. So normally we don't promote a webinar or get people to register until 48 to 72 hours before the actual live call. We found that if we start pushing a webinar a week in advance, people forget about it. Other things happen in their lives. So we usually don't even promote a webinar to get people to register until 2 or 3 days before. So we try to, bang a big punch in the first, as soon as they register. So they register within the first, 2 or 3 days before the call. Then we like to hit them with the first reminder, usually 24 to 48 hours before the call. And then we like to have those two reminders really close together, 2 or 3 hours before the call, and then one right, hey, we're going live right now, jump on this call.
Now, you're mailing to your list. Have you ever used Facebook ads or any kind of SEO to drive people to a webinar registration page?
Not SEO, just because the SEO strategy is more long-term, where it's hard to rank a page and drive traffic for a short-term event. So, but we've done cold traffic from Facebook. It works. I mean, we tend to opt people into a free piece of content and then get them on our list that way, and then promote a webinar. But I mean, we have run cold traffic, and I mean, you listen to guys like Frank Kern and Russell Brunson and some of these guys, they throw tons of money at Facebook ads for cold webinar traffic, and they're at least breaking even on it, just because they know the value of their offer and how well webinars convert. It doesn't have to necessarily be hot traffic. It can be cold traffic. So we've done a little bit of it. It's something that we would like to scale up, though.
It's funny that you mentioned that you break even. The whole idea is not necessarily to break even, but you don't really break even when you throw tons of money. It'd be great to recoup your investment, but I always thought that if you throw a bunch of money out there, you're going to get something in return, which is that email list, is that person who's going to opt in. So you're going to have the opportunity not only to make money through that webinar, but you're going to be able to keep them on your list and perhaps sell them down the road.
Yeah, so, I mean, I was going to say one of the stats that we always look at is earning per attendee. How much are we making either per registrant and then per people who actually attend the live call? Because if that's pretty consistent, if we can say, hey, affiliate, for every person that attends, you're going to earn up to around $15 per attendee. Right. So if they know, oh, well, I can get 300 people onto the call, well, then I can make about that much. And
that's also a way that once you know the numbers, once you analyze it, it's also a way to scale it up. So if you're going to make $15 per 100, take it to 1,000, and it just scales up from there.
Exactly.
So let's talk about the webinar itself. How do you start your webinar? And let's say you have your first couple of slides. If you do a PowerPoint, if you have your first couple of slides, how do you set people up to let them know that not only are you going to deliver content, but there's going to be a pitch at the end?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is that we follow a format for almost everything that we do online, like whether it's a video sales letter, whether it's a webinar, we have a 10-step format. That's just so, and I can actually provide that to your subscribers if they'd be interested in it. It's just it's a free mind map that we've given out in the past, and it walks through all of the elements that we use in a sales page, in a webinar presentation. You use the same elements in almost any type of marketing that you do, right? I mean, introduction, early scarcity, features and benefits. Now it's a little bit different for a webinar because there's the content portion of it, but when it comes to actually closing and selling them, there's a certain format that we follow. But to answer your question, the first thing that we do, especially in the first 5 or 10 minutes, we're really just trying to engage the audience. People tend to not, people come on late. So we want to make sure that we don't really get into the meat of our presentation until about 10 to 15 minutes into the webinar, just to make sure that we max out and get everybody onto the call. So we'll usually just remind people, hey, turn off all your distractions and tell me where you guys are calling in from. Just get people conversating and engaging with you in the beginning, just so you can make sure that they're attentive before you get into all the content.
What about the About Me page? I had an experience a couple of weeks ago where I joined a webinar and the host introduced the presenter, and the presenter went on for 23 minutes telling him all about himself, the picture in front of the airplane and the Rolls Royce in front of the mansion, and where he went on vacation, and him and his kids, and 23 minutes before he even got into any content at all. What do you feel about that?
Yeah, I keep it to just a few minutes max. I think it's important that they understand and know who you are, and why they should be listening to you. So I think you need to give some sort of proof of why they should listen to you. So I usually give about a 2 to 3 minute introduction of who I am with about 5 bullet points, just so they have some frame of reference of who I am and why they should listen to what I'm saying.
And that usually takes up the first few minutes, and you're absolutely correct. I always preach that you should start your webinar on time. If it's going to be a 7 o'clock Eastern time call, you start it at 7 o'clock. Yeah. You can still dance a little bit for the first 10 minutes till more people come in. But I always believe that, if you start it on time, not only it respects the people who are on your webinar and who have attended on time, but it also shows that, people always say people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So by doing that and starting on time, that gives your attendees the respect that they're looking for. Mm-hmm. So we've talked about the intro. We talked about what do you do in the beginning to promise your attendees that if they stick around, what kind of incentive do you offer? Now, I know you were talking about Jason Fladley just a minute ago, but what do you do in order to keep the attendees around till they hear your pitch or presentation or your close?
I reiterate what I say on the registration page. So if we're going to promise something, I'm just going to reiterate it. I'm going to say, well, here's what you're going to learn if you stay on the call. And then if we have some sort of ethical bribe, hey, stay till the end, and I'm going to give you, whatever it is. And we'll try to tailor the offer to whatever we're presenting. So I just reiterate that from whatever I've said on the registration page.
Some people give away cash, and I found that fascinating. Stick around, and we're going to give away 5 $100 bills. Sure. Chris Reckord's good for that. That's enough incentive for me to stick around. Yeah. You never really know how many people that are going to be on a webinar. There's a maximum of 1,000 people on GoToWebinar. What webinar platform do you use? Do you use your own Webinar Ignition, or do you ever switch off and use GoTo or On TV or Webinar Jam? And I know they're competitors, but I'm just curious. Do you always use Webinar Ignition, or do you ever go to GoTo?
Yeah, we use both. So we use GoToWebinar and we use Webinar Ignition. So for some of our live calls, we use GoToWebinar just because, with Webinar Ignition, you have to leverage a live streaming app like Hangouts, and Hangouts has a little bit of a delay. There's not as much engagement with the live portion of Webinar Ignition. So when we do live calls, we usually will go to GoToWebinar. With whenever we create evergreen funnels where we bring people into an evergreen webinar, we use Webinar Ignition. So it's great for that. But we'll use both. Just depends on what it is that we're doing and what type of marketing we're putting together.
Are you familiar with Amazon's S3? Do you ever stream from Amazon's S3? I know that's pretty popular now.
Yeah. So all of our evergreen webinars are streaming from S3.
Awesome. Yeah. And that's something that if you are doing your webinar, if you're on a webinar platform, or if you have a plugin like Mark's, S3 and Amazon, it might be a little bit more reliable than GoTo.
Yeah, and so especially with our Webinar Ignition platform, we have a custom player. So when it's an evergreen webinar, people it looks like it's live. So we strip out all the controls, and but you have to stream it from Amazon S3, because if you use YouTube, they're going to see the YouTube logo in there, right, and they can click. And so that's one of the reasons that we use Amazon S3.
Now, we've gone through the beginning of your webinar. We've gone through the About You page, and now we're going into the content. First, let me ask you, how long should a webinar be?
We generally stick to between 60 and 90 minutes. We've found that after about 90 minutes, people are busy these days. They have ADD online. They're doing 1,000 different things. It's hard enough to keep their attention for more than, 30 minutes, let alone 90 minutes.
Right.
So, I mean, if you have really good content, you can keep them on longer. If your content is subpar, then you're going to have to make it a little bit shorter. So we generally try to pitch if we're pitching a product, usually between 60, 70, 80 minutes, we're pitching that product. And then, I mean, the webinar may extend to 2 hours if there's a lot of engagement and a lot of Q&A that we need to address. Right. But for the most part, 60 to 90 minutes is our sweet spot.
You know, in fact, there's a lot of statistics out there that a person's attention span who's attending a webinar is 51 minutes. And that's 51 minutes worth of content. So if you've done your first 10 minutes, whether they stay on for 51 minutes or they stay on for 61 minutes, I always thought that was the sweet spot to go into your presentation. Now, you mentioned you do 60 to 90 minutes. Do you break it down by segments and then stop your segment and then go into a Q&A or a trial close? Or do you just go completely through your presentation and then at one particular point you go, okay, now it's time for Q&A?
Well, I mean, I will say this. I mean, I've definitely picked up a bunch of tips over the years, watching guys like Russell Brunson and Jason and you and all the guys that are so great with webinars. I think it's something that even no one's ever perfected. You're always trying to tweak and hone your strategy. One thing that has dramatically increased conversions is after you're done with your content and you're getting ready to pitch your product, you don't just pitch your product and then end it, right? You're always closing. I mean, you close 5, 6, sometimes 10 times during that whole closing session. So, you may have a hard close in the very beginning when you're presenting, you're stacking your value of what the offer is going to be. Then you hit them with the buy link, but the very first time you show them the buy link, that's just the first time, right? And then after you've shown them the buy link, then you're going to introduce some fast action bonuses, right? To help introduce scarcity and get people to take action, right? There's always people that are on the fence, they don't want to pull the trigger. So you need to kind of hit those emotional hot buttons and get them to take their credit card out. And one of the ways to do that is through scarcity, is through bonuses, is through stacking value, is through close after close after close. And so one of the things when I first started was my close was about 60 seconds long. Now my close is about 20 to 30 minutes long. So,
and you know what? Sometimes you're supposed to actually. What I like to share with people is to close throughout the entire webinar. Each different segment is an opportunity for them to shake their head and say yes, and get them to say yes, yes, yes. Because when it comes time for you to ask for the money, they should be saying yes. And of course, all closing is overcoming all objections to where people cannot give any reasons not to buy. And overcoming objection is very important. How do you overcome objections? And when you do overcome these objections, do you know what the objections are going to be, and do you address them during your content period?
Yeah, of course. And I think so. If you're smart, what you do is you take note of the questions that are being asked on your first few webinars, right? If you're going to keep running this webinar over and over again, take advantage of that and know what the questions are that people are asking and build that into your presentation. I saw that when Russell Brunson first started promoting ClickFunnels, or when he had his whatever his webinar pitch was, he had 5, 10, 15 different questions that were already pre-written on slides, and he addressed all those. So he was overcoming those objections, and he knew exactly what the main questions were going to be. And so sometimes they were questions that people were asking. Other times it was just made up questions to reiterate all of the features and benefits and selling points of his offer. So of course, I mean, if you can, make sure you study and know what those questions are and tweak your presentation accordingly.
And that's a good point too, because nobody really knows, and especially attendees know that there's 1,000 people on the call. There's a maximum amount of 1,000 people on GoToWebinar, but you can have 50 people on that call. You could have 20 people, you could have 200. It doesn't matter. The point is then when you're doing a webinar, people want to know that you're communicating with them. So one of the tips that I tell people is when you're doing a webinar, you're doing this webinar for that one person that's sitting across from you through the screen, and you need to communicate with them. And you have to anticipate what kind of question or what kind of objection are they going to throw up there? And it gives you an opportunity to eliminate that. So exactly what you said, and I noticed you've been talking about Russell Brunson a lot, and he is one of the guys who has done very well doing webinars with his product, and the way he has tweaked that is it's just amazing. And I find, Mark, that I've done over 400 webinars, over 350 different webinars with different products, and everybody has different styles, and that's why I love to I look at these styles and I analyze it and break it down, and knowing the objection questions and overcoming the objection questions, but making somebody feel like it's the person that's right across from you, that they asked the question and you answered it to them, makes it more likely than not that they'll purchase from you.
I 100% agree. I 100% agree. Yeah, I mean that's all selling is overcoming objections, right? So
yeah, well, and it's closing as well. They say agency always be closing. We're always closing, but there's also a reason that people buy, and people buy on feelings and they buy on emotions. Plus, sometimes people have a problem and they need to get that problem solved. But I was talking with somebody the other day, and she said to me, people don't know what their problems are. Have you ever run into that on a webinar?
Yeah, I mean, what I like to do is ask questions in the very beginning of the webinar. So hopefully those questions resonate with the audience. And so when you ask questions, that gets people thinking like, hey, do you have a challenge of, whatever, XYZ, right? And then you're going to give them the solution at the end. But the more questions you ask, the more and participation in. When you ask questions in the beginning, you can kind of gauge your audience, right? Say, hey, say yes in the chat box, or put a 1 in the chat box if you have these same issues that I do. And if you're getting a lot of people saying no, well, then maybe your marketing strategy is wrong. Maybe you're driving the wrong type of people to your webinars, right? Or you just need to tweak your presentation to speak to that audience, right? So you have to understand who your audience is. And one of the best ways to do that is by asking questions in the beginning.
And, that's such a small percentage, too, of the people who do interact. The people who are going to ask the questions are going to be that select few. There's going to be 5, 6, maybe 10 questions out of how many people that you have attending.
Right.
100, 200, 300, 500. That's why it's always good, and I suggest to have those questions prepared. And like you said, once you do these webinars over and over and over again, you're going to be able to know what those objection questions are, and you're going to be able to answer them.
Yeah, and there's nothing worse than doing a webinar. It's going to happen to everybody, right? Where there's 25 people on, and you're like, okay, we're going to start taking Q&A now, and there's only 25 people, so maybe one question comes in, and then you're like, well, it looks like there's no more questions. So that's why it's important to make sure that you have questions available and scripted out.
And you're bringing up something as well. Even if there's 25 people on, and this is how I share with a lot of people who are doing the webinars, whether there's 25 people on, whether there's 100 people, whether there's 500 people on. I've had some people say, well, if you're not going to put 1,000 people on a webinar, I'm not going to do it. Or somebody else would say, well, if you can't get 100 people on, I'm not going to do it. Or they get on the webinar and they see that there's only 50 or 60, and they go, I'm not doing this. But the important thing is that you sent out an email presenting that this person is going to be on and going to give you information that you need that will help make you do a better webinar. And yet they don't understand that whether it's one person or 25 people, these people came to see you, and they're a potential prospect, and they're a potential close, they're a potential customer for life. Do you not agree?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I think one of the biggest pieces of this is that, hey, you know what? After your webinar, that's where 50% of your revenue actually is generated from the replay. So just because you may only have 25, 50 people on the live call, well, if the follow-up sequence is done correctly, that's another 50 people or 100 people or whatever that will see your presentation. So, I mean, people forget about just because you made X sales on a live call, you should be able to double that with a proper follow-up sequence.
You're absolutely correct. And it all depends on how it's mailed or not. Again, you're just selling another product. You're not selling the live version. You're selling the evergreen or the replay. And it's also good for you, because if you do such a great webinar for those 25 people, you'll be able to use that webinar over and over and over and over again. So there's a benefit for that as well.
I agree.
Now, you were talking about once you get to the closing part, so you've gone and you've done all of your content, and now you're throwing out the buy link, and then you mentioned something about bonuses. What kind of bonuses do you offer immediately, and do you find that most people will buy because of the bonuses and not necessarily because of your product or the content?
I find that bonuses put people over the edge. It turns a good offer into a great offer, a no-brainer offer. So what we usually do is have one amazing bonus that just kind of blows them away, and we make that super, super exclusive, time-sensitive, quantity-based, whatever you want. And so we really try to hit that first bonus home really hard, and say, hey, if you take action right now, you guys are going to be able to get this. And then we usually do about 3 bonuses. We don't do 2. When people start to do 5, 10, 15 bonuses, it starts to muddy the offer, and it dilutes the value of the offer. You actually think you're stacking more and more value, but it makes the offer more confusing to the buyer. So what we try to do is come up with 1 or 2 really great bonuses that are time sensitive bonuses, that are fast action bonuses. And then we'll also come up with maybe 2 or 3 other bonuses at max of that, hey, if you didn't get it on the live webinar, well, you can still get, these few bonuses too. So.
And what kind of bonuses do you offer? Do you offer software? Do you offer training? Do you offer somebody else's product?
It depends. So, again, one thing I learned from Russell was, you can only scratch that itch so many times, right? So you have your core offer, which is going to solve one problem, right? So the bonuses that I always give out are bonuses that can scratch another itch, right? So say someone has a problem with Facebook marketing, right? And your offer has a solution for how you can get more fans or whatever, right? Well, maybe you come up with a bonus that's around traffic or around conversion or something complementary to what you're offering. So the last thing that you want to do is give them, if you're giving them the core offer is Facebook training, you don't want to give them more Facebook training because your core offer is what scratches that itch. So it depends on every offer, or every pitch is a little bit different, but we have a lot of software. So we always try to offer different pieces of software that complement the core offer.
And I agree with that. So when you have something that people have attended your webinar because they have that particular problem that they feel that your webinar or your product is going to overcome, if you offer a bonus that coordinates with this, like you said, if you're doing a program on Facebook and then your Facebook happens to be something to do with content, you could also give them a program about Facebook ads and perhaps how to do Facebook ads.
Exactly.
Something that coordinates it, and it makes that bonus just that much more and reason for people to buy. Now, you mentioned something about scarcity. Do you feel that scarcity is important, or is it a sales technique that people are all too familiar with and turns them off?
It's the number one factor, I think. I mean, it's how you get people to buy, right? I mean, if you don't have scarcity, people won't buy your product. It's just it's how it is. I mean, I learned that fairly early on, that if you do not offer legitimate scarcity in your offers of some sort, then people will just say, "Oh, well, I'll wait to buy it. I'll buy it the next day." Guess what? They don't do that. So you need to have it.
Yeah, people have to buy now, because once they leave, and you can't rely on them if they're going to watch the replay or not. And no matter how many times, once they're out of the ether, and I call it into the ether, you are exactly correct. Do you use a timer, or how do you offer your scarcity? What do you say to your clients?
Yeah, so I mean, we've done all different types of scarcity. The most effective one that we have found is we'll add a countdown timer inside of the presentation, and we'll be like, we'll do a 20-minute countdown timer, and we'll say, hey, we'll go through various closes, and then we'll have kind of a final countdown timer for 20 minutes. Say, okay, hey, we're going to do some Q&A. We're starting the countdown timer. Once the countdown timer hits 0, then these bonuses will be gone, right? So we've done it that way. We've also said, hey, if you purchase on this live call before we end, you'll get these bonuses, right? We've also done quantity-based scarcity, where we say, hey, for the first 25 people, you're going to get these bonuses, right? So we've done all different types of scarcity, and they're all very effective. So I don't know if there's necessarily one or the other, if you do time-based or quantity-based, but they both are effective.
And you mentioned something about quantity-based as well. People don't know that you've actually given away 25. And what I suggest to people, you might say that there's 10 left.
Right.
And you know what? You could still give away 25, because then again, people don't know. I don't believe that it's deceptive, but I believe that it's just a tool that I'm going to give away 10, but I didn't tell them I'm going to give away 10 more and 10 more and 10 more.
Yep.
Do you find that on the replay that if you tell people they're no longer available for the bonus, that they're not going to purchase?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. You got to be careful with what you promise, because you don't want that to bite you in the butt or lose credibility, right? If you say, hey, this bonus is only going to be available on this live call, and then people are watching on the replay, and maybe they message your support team and they're like, hey, I really want the offer, but I'd like the bonuses as well. Do you say no? Do you stick to your guns, or do you open it up? It's a hard answer to, it's a hard question to answer, I should say. So what we try to do, like I said, we'll have that 1 or 2 bonuses that we save for just the live audience. And sometimes we'll actually edit the replay, and we'll take that part out so they don't even see it.
Right. And especially if you put it in a strategic place,
right,
for the replay, you're not going to turn those people off.
Correct.
Let's talk about follow-up. On GoTo, you have a registration list, so to speak. And of course, usually it's anywhere between 30 or 50% of the people who register will show up. Even though that you have, let's say 100%, let's talk in percentages. You have 100 people that register, you have 50 people that show up. Do you use that registration list, or do you use just the people who show up, or just the people who buy for your follow-up?
We actually do everybody. So, I mean, nowadays you'd be lucky to get 20 to 30% on a call, right? So, I mean, if you have 100 registrants and you're getting, 50 people, that's pretty good. I mean, nowadays it's, it's not like it was 3 to 5 years ago or 8 years ago or whenever webinars started. I mean, the attendance rate was 50 to 70%. Then it just slowly kept going down, right? And so you'd be lucky to get 20 or 30%. And that's why the replay is so important. So you need to make sure that you have all of those elements in place. You need to have a good follow-up sequence in place. We usually will mail everybody who registered. So some people just want to see it again, and just maybe they just love the content so much, maybe they missed a few pieces of it and they want to go back and watch it again. So we'll send out a replay for it, and then we'll usually send out 3 emails. So we'll send one out either the night, like immediately after the webinar. If the webinar did really, really well on the live call, we send out the first replay like immediately after. Okay. If it did just okay, then we usually send it out in the morning, the next day. And then we'll send one out 24 hours after that. And then maybe we'll do a final one after that, just depending on how well it converted. If it converted really, really well, we may send out an extra email.
Now, what about evergreen webinars, a recorded webinar that is going to be just your standard, your basic, your benchmark? Do you use Webinar Ignition? And when you do use Webinar Ignition, do you make it like it's a live event where you have people that are entering the room and some of these names that people are actually getting wise to? Or do you eliminate that and just create a presentation that is strictly content and close on a webinar?
We've done both. If we're going to do an evergreen webinar where it's a replay or recording, I should say, but we have an affiliate that can push a lot of traffic, but we want to automate the entire process, we'll actually have somebody that will answer questions in the background. So they can still ask questions, and we'll just have someone that mans the chat. So it technically is live. There's someone there to answer their questions, but the webinar is recorded. And I know plenty of marketers that say, hey, if I have a webinar that just did really, really well and converted great, I'll use that for live calls. I'll just press the play button and let that run, because I know that webinar converts really well.
Right, and you know what? And that's a very good tip as well. To have somebody work the back end is very important, not only for a live webinar, but for a recorded webinar, or if you're going to be doing an encore. Do you have somebody when you're giving a presentation, is it just you, or do you have somebody that works the back end, not only to answer the questions, but to put the buy buttons in and to put the either the cut and paste or the chat box for them to go ahead and click on it to buy now?
Yeah, we have someone that mans the chat. They answer the questions during the presentation, puts in the buy button when we say the call to action. We'll sometimes, if we're doing time or quantity based bonuses, we'll put in the chat. We'll have them put how many bonuses are left during the close. So yeah, it's great to have someone, if you can have someone available to answer questions, because especially if you have a packed house, you can't get to all of the questions, because if you have 500 or 1,000 people on a call, it's almost impossible to answer all of their questions live on the call. So if you can have someone answering those questions in the background, at least you're trying to get to everybody.
You're absolutely right. And plus, it shows that you're doing that personal interaction when you're actually typing in and answering the question, because now all of a sudden you put yourself on a one-on-one. There are
Right.
people who are, they acknowledge that there's a human being that are answering these questions, and it's more likely than not, whether they buy then or they buy in the future, they've all of a sudden built a rapport. And everything is relationships, and building a relationship, whether it's somebody who's just an attendee on a webinar or whether it's somebody who's a prospect who's going to stay a customer. People buy people, they buy on emotions, they buy on feelings, they buy if they like you, and if they like you, they will buy from you. And that's a very good tip as well.
Yep, well said.
So let me go ahead and recap what we've talked about today, and then I'm going to ask you a couple more questions, and we're going to go ahead and end this. But we talked about the beginning of your webinar, where you come on and you give them an idea of what's going to happen throughout this entire webinar. We talked about how long the webinar is going to be, anywhere between 60 to 90 minutes. You mentioned that about 10 minutes into the webinar is when you're going to actually start the content, but you're going to be building a rapport with the attendees there by talking about not only what they're getting on their webinar, but the About Me page and the story, the hero story. And then you go into your content. Now, we didn't really talk about this, but do you segment your content? For example, do you do 7 minutes on one part of the product, 7 minutes on another part, 10 minutes on one part, and then do you stop after each segment to answer questions, or do you just do a continuous flow?
I try to have a continuous flow. I try not to break the flow. I usually try to, if there's, what I usually do is build in usually 2 different spots in the presentation where I'll ask a question and want to get some engagement with them. But the last thing you want to do is get into your rhythm, into your flow, and then have to stop and take questions. And because then it just breaks everything, and you lose kind of your train of thought and the flow of your webinar. And before you know it, you could have stopped 2, 3, 4 different times. And then by the time you get to the pitch, you're like 2 hours into it, and it ruins the whole flow. So I usually try to get some sort of engagement at least 2 different times during the presentation, but it's built in. It's built in. I know exactly what I'm going to be asking them, and then I want them to have a quick answer.
Now, do you ever qualify your attendees? I mean, ask qualifying questions as to what it is that they're looking for, what kind of problems that they have, and gear that once you start doing your presentation?
Yeah, and so back to what I was saying, just a little while ago was, in the first 5 minutes, I'll ask usually 1 or 2 simple questions just to kind of gauge the room and find out a little bit more about who they are, and obviously those questions are going to be related and play into my presentation. But I either want to just get a confirmation from them that yes, we're all on the same page here, or maybe there's the audience is a little bit off from what I'm going to be talking about, and I can somehow tweak my presentation to speak to that audience.
And that's very good, because you want to get people to be engaged. And a little bit earlier you said either type in yes, or type in the number 1, because you want people to participate. And also it gives the opportunity for whoever is working your back end to communicate with them and let them know that there is somebody live, that there is somebody who cares and is available to answer your questions, whether you have one or not.
Yeah. I mean, we usually say in the beginning, hey, we're definitely going to do a Q&A session, but we're going to save that to the end. If you have a question that is, has to do with the content, feel free to throw it in the chat box. We have someone that's live that will answer your questions, but we'll try to address as many or all of the questions at the very end while, live on the call.
And there's one technique that I use or that I share with people is that even though you're dealing with somebody in the question box in the back end, you always have that one person that says, well, I've got to go to another webinar, or it's taking too long. Yeah. I just need to know the buy button. My suggestion, or I want to have the buy button. My suggestion was go ahead and give it to them, because you're only giving it to one person,
right?
And that's going to give them the opportunity whether they purchase or not. If somebody wants to leave your webinar and all they want to know is the price, it's more likely than not that they're not going to buy then. However, if you can say something like, well, give me your email address, or you already have their email address because they opted into the webinar, we'll contact you if you have any other questions, knowing that they got the buy button. You can find out if they didn't buy, why they didn't buy. And that's also something that's very important when it comes to analyzing your webinars. Don't you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there are certain people that just say, hey, I'm ready to buy right now. So we demo software a lot during our presentations because we sell a lot of software. And so some people, as soon as they see the software, they're like, okay, I'm in. Tell me how much it is. Give me the buy button. I'm ready to go. So for those people, we're not going to hold them over the coals and wait, have them wait another half hour till we pitch. So we'll give it to them. But yeah, sometimes there are people who say, hey, I got to go, or I got to go to a meeting or whatever. And we'll, just depends on the person. Sometimes we'll give them the link, or we'll say, hey, we're going to send out a replay to everybody in a few hours so you can go and pick up where you left off.
Right. And it also gives, like I said, the opportunity not only to give them the link, but you can also tell them that, if you leave this webinar, you're not eligible for those bonuses that we offered if you stay around till the end of the webinar. So it also says, well, maybe I will stick around. So, that's just the one way that you can not only keep them on the webinar, but you can keep them engaged. Mm-hmm. So we've just talked about the intro. We've talked about the about me. We've talked about the presentation. And we also talked about the amount of time that it takes for the attention span for your webinar. Now we've gone to the close, and you went ahead and you've offered the close, and then you've given the scarcity. And now it's time for question and answers. How long do you spend on question and answers, and when do you wrap up your webinar?
Well, you'll be surprised how many people stay on the call for as long as you want to stay on the call. So, I mean, you could have people, they'll stay in there for 3 or 4 hours if you keep it going, right? And so it's an opportunity to continue to close them. So the Q&A, I mean, we'll have a list of 5, 10, 15 questions that we are going to address regardless of if they're asked, just because, again, we want to hit home all the main points in our offer. But then, I mean, I'll usually stay on as long as there are questions. I mean, if there's lots of questions coming in, that means that they are very interested, and you need to overcome those objections. So sometimes Q&A is 15 minutes long. Sometimes it's an hour plus, right? So it just depends on your audience. But I'll stay on as long as people are engaged and they'll listen. So,
and Mark, it's totally awesome what we've talked about today. That pretty much is going to do that. But before I go, I want to ask you, I want to pick your brain a little bit. We've talked about pretty much everything that you do in order to make not only your webinar successful, but to help close. What can you offer to the people who are listening or reading as part of this program? What can you offer them? Some kind of tip or trick or something that you do that nobody else does, or something that everybody else does that's going to help increase a closing ratio, or increase one more sale, one more conversion, or one more follow-up to your list?
Well, I mean, it's pretty simple. Practice makes perfect, right? People are so worried about having everything just right. You need to take imperfect action, right? So get out there and do your first webinar. Guess what? It's probably not going to be that good, okay? I mean, it took me years until I felt comfortable presenting on webinars. And so just get out there and do it. I mean, so it's not necessarily you need to have all of the answers, right? And you'll pick up things along the way. So go and study people who do webinars, right? Get on people's lists and follow them and watch their presentation style. Find your own style, but analyze how the format of, what elements are they putting into their webinars. And that's what I did for a very long time. I mean, I was presenting webinars and I wasn't that good at it in the beginning, but I just started watching other people, and practice makes perfect. And you start to pick up new tips along the way. And before you know it, it just becomes second nature to you.
Actually, it's perfect practice.
Perfect practice.
Perfect. Mark, thank you so very much. I mean, it's been awesome having you here. Again, you were one of the first people that not only when we did a webinar, but using Webinar Ignition as a blueprint for you. Now, Webinar Ignition, let's talk about that for just
Sure.
one quick second. That's a WordPress plugin, is that correct?
It is. We're working on version 2.0 actually, and I've never actually told anyone that, so this is kind of an exclusive announcement. But we're right in the middle of development of it. We're turning it into a web app, so it's not going to be a plugin anymore. But I mean, the plugin is available for sale. The version 2.0. It's a big project, so unfortunately we still are a few months away before we can even bring on some alpha and beta testers. But we have revamped the entire thing, and now it's going to be a web app, so you can just use your browser to access the product instead of having to install it on WordPress. But I mean, the plugin is great. We've been selling it for 3 or 4 years now. So we have tens of thousands of marketers that use it. Great for live webinars, great for evergreen webinars. It has a lot of great flexibility. You can translate it. If you're in a different language, so it's a great product.
And where can we get this?
Webinarignition.com. Very easy.
Duh.
Yeah.
Webinarignition.com. That's where you can get Mark Thompson's product. It's a great product. I've worked with it. I've known Mark for a long time. Like he said, he's been doing this 3-4 years and forever and a day. If they wanted to get a hold of you, if they wanted to ask a question, what's a good email address for you where they can contact you and perhaps pick your brain or become a customer?
Yeah, so I mean, digitalkickstart.com is our brand, is our company, and I mean, you can learn everything, all the different products that we have, and then we also have a support desk. So you can just email support@digitalkickstart.com, and if you just say attention to me, our agents will route it to me. So that's a great way to get a hold of me. Or go on Facebook and join our Digital Kickstart Facebook group. We just started it probably about a month ago, and there's about 2,000 members in there right now, but it's very active, a lot of marketers, entrepreneurs, and so you can just search for Digital Kickstart official group, join that group, and I'm in there all the time, creating new video content and answering questions and interacting with all the members there.
And it's a great program as well. In the beginning of our hangout today, I mentioned that you're from Raleigh.
From Raleigh.
From Raleigh, North Carolina, and there's going to be an event coming up in September, and it's an event that we actually met at one of the first times many years ago. It was probably 4 years ago. Yeah. It was Sam England and Brian McLeod's Warrior event. There's going to be another Warrior event that they're doing that Sam's doing with Ron Douglas. Did you know that?
I did not know that. Is it going to be in Raleigh?
It is going to be in Raleigh, and you'll never guess where it's going to be.
It's at the Marriott Hotel?
No, it's the Holiday Inn. But
the Holiday Inn. Yeah, that's right.
The Marriott was something else. So for those of you who are going to be in Raleigh, North Carolina at Sam England's event, we're going to talk Mark, who's going to show up there anyway. I mean, he's a hop, skip, and a jump. Mark, we're going to expect to see you there.
When is that? September?
It is in September. It's probably mid-month in September. So I'm certainly going to keep you aware of that and keep you informed. And I certainly look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, that's a busy month. There seems to be a lot of events going on in September, but I'll try to get to it if.
Well, there is, and you know what? I remember there was 1 or 2 events. I think you had a baby during one event, or you didn't have a baby, but your wife had that baby during one of the events. Well, anyway, Mark, thank you so very much for spending this hour with us. It was certainly informative, enjoyable. The things that you've offered, not only the tips, the tricks, but how you do things are invaluable for anybody who's not only listening to this, but who's reading this in the program. So, Mark, on behalf of myself, I want to thank you so very much for taking your time and giving us the information to help make our webinars and 50K Webinar Blueprint a better product. Thank you so very much.
It was my pleasure. Always good to catch up.
All right. Thanks, Mark, very much. And thank you, everybody, for joining us for this live hangout of 50K Webinar Blueprint. The product is going to be available to you if it's not available to you already in just a couple of weeks. So on behalf of myself and my family, and thank you so very much for joining us. We'll see you next time. So long, everybody.